All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focus, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and human experience with the stated goal of keeping you 10 steps ahead. I'm looking forward to today's conversation, as I always do, because I love these things. But before we get started, if you have not, be sure you go sign up for the Substack, because I know not everybody can listen to the whole episode or catch the whole thing. And so you can catch the highlight reel and my biggest takeaways over there. So if you're not signed up, please do that. But I am joined, and today we're going to be talking about managers. And I'm specifically focusing on managers, not leaders, because I think there's a distinction that we need to make between the two. And we're going to be talking about managers, what it means to build managers, and why, as organizations, we really should care about this and what really goes into it. So I'm really looking forward to this dialogue. I think there's no better time for us to have this conversation than right now. And so to navigate that with me, I'm joined by Eric Girard, who's the CEO of Girard Training Solutions and the author of Lead Like a Pro. So Eric, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, so I've gotten to know you, and I know we actually originally had to move one of our ones. So it's been a while since we've connected, but a little bit of background. I've gotten to know you. I love your story. I also love, just getting to know folks a little bit outside the lines of what they would be known as, on LinkedIn or whatever. And your scuba background is super interesting. But so for folks who maybe don't know who you are, what's the backyard barbecue summary of who Eric is?
Okay, so backyard barbecue, we're standing there with drinks talking.
Yeah.
I have been in learning and development over 30 years, 20 of which was in Silicon Valley doing management development at companies like Apple, Symantec, Applied Materials, so big tech companies. During the pandemic, my wife and I said, okay, everything's been thrown up in the air. Let's get out of Dodge. Let's get out of Silicon Valley. It's a silly place. And so we came up to the Seattle area. We live outside of Seattle. And during the pandemic, so we did this in 2020, we moved, bought a house. I started my company. My wife got a new job and started a side hustle, and I became a scuba instructor all before December of 2020. So it was a very productive pandemic.
All the life events,
yes,
all the life change. You should have just had a child in there too. You might as well have done that, and maybe something like that to add to the mix.
Well, we brought the ones we had with that. That was
good. There you go.
So,
there you go.
Yeah. And I do have twin 15-year-old daughters who are amazing people. They just registered for the local community college yesterday. And that just blows me away, because that is not the path I took. I mean, my kids are overachieving, and I'm like, your father was a slacker. So I don't know where you got that.
I love that. Well, I'm interested on the dad side. I'm interested to see, my kids are still, my oldest is only 13. My youngest is 1. And it's going to be interesting to watch as the 7 grow and develop, to see how they turn out. Will they turn out like dad? Will they turn out like mom, or somewhere in the middle between the two? So that's awesome. Okay. So in terms of the manager thing though, I'm curious. So what ended up getting you focused on the manager piece? Obviously you spent a lot of time. Well, actually, no, here's my first question. Okay. Since you said you came from the tech arena, I often hear it's different here. Are the managers completely different in big tech than they are anywhere else industry wise?
Well, hang on a sec. I want to take a detour, because I want to take issue with something you said during the intro. So you made the distinction between managers and leaders.
Yeah.
I think a good manager is also a leader. I think
I agree.
I agree with. A good manager needs leadership capability, but conversely, not all leaders are managers. And some people who are leaders are actually terrible managers. Yes. But they have leadership capability, and they can galvanize action with people around them. So I just wanted to.
No, and so I actually appreciate you taking the time to point that out, because my goal in saying I think there's a distinction is for the very reason that you described, where I think sometimes the word leaders gets thrown out there, and what people really are talking about is managers. Like, hey, we need to develop leadership skills, which, yes, there are leadership skills that are important for managers, but there's also some unique sets of skills that managers need, and it's not just limited to managers. And when I think about leadership skills, there's a lot of leadership skills that you need whether you're managing people or not. And I think that's where sometimes the terminology actually does a disservice to some of companies' efforts to develop their people.
Yeah, and I think there's that nice Venn diagram of where you've got leadership on one side and management on the other side, and they overlap in the middle there. So,
Yeah.
anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there before
No.
I started down the path.
Well, hey, I told you backstage, the focus of the show is we have this robust dialogue. So if people take issue with something I say, I fully expect them to jump in. And I appreciate the clarity on that, because I completely agree with you on that. And I think the unfortunate part I've seen lots of people feel like they don't benefit or they can't be leaders unless they're managers. And that's just not true.
Oh yeah, I worked with a lot of people who were fantastic leaders who did not want the management position, did not want
Yeah.
that role, did not want that responsibility, but they were incredibly influential people, and I would have followed them anywhere, even though they didn't have the title. So
Yep.
there you
Yeah.
go.
And I think that's an encouragement to people out there. There's a perception. I see this in a lot of organizations because I've worked in and worked with a lot of different companies. And one of the big gaps that often exists in a company is this perception that the only path up is management. If you really want to be a leader, if you really want to succeed in your career, you have to take the management track. And that just isn't true. And I think that actually largely contributes to where you find people who really don't want to be managers and have no place being managers ending up in management roles because they thought, well, I thought that's what I had to do. And you don't.
Yeah, and a lot of folks feel like if I want a promotion, if I want a raise, then I have to take this role. I would really encourage folks if you're feeling like you sort of hit a plateau in your career at your current place of work, ask HR or ask your manager about, is there like a dual track?
Yep.
Can I head right and become a manager, or can I head left and head up the technical path and
Yep.
become more and more senior in the technical arena without taking on direct reports? Because management's not for
No, it's
everybody.
not.
Just like scuba is not for everybody. There's some folks who really like it and enjoy it, and there's some folks who don't. And I encourage you to get to know yourself well enough to be honest
Yeah.
and say, I love leading people. I love managing people. I love developing people, or I don't. And
Yep.
then be clear about that, and then have that conversation to say, how can I advance anyway if I
Yeah.
don't want to take that career path?
Well, and I think focusing on this a little bit, especially early in the conversation, is really important because I think if you don't do this part well, the rest of what we're going to talk about is going to just be pushing a rock uphill because you will find yourself in a place where you're like, well, I don't even really want to do this. Now I'm trying to get better at something that I actually don't really want to do. And the whole thing just becomes exponentially harder. But there is this mindset shift that often needs to break that it's like there isn't only one track, but the point of talking to your HR leaders and saying, what are my options? What different paths might I have? And the number of people I've talked out of moving into management roles over the years is probably neck and neck with people I've talked into it, where I've said, wait, why do you think you want to be a manager? Why? Because I have to. And you go, no, you don't. Like, have you considered these other options or these pathways or things that you could go here? Or I just even think of some of what you're doing. It's like, have you considered doing something outside of your traditional day job as a way to use your skills and talents to make additional funds or, whatever you want to do? Like, there's way more paths than I think we often realize. And the idea that, well, next step in my career is I guess I have to take on people and that's it, is a very narrow and limited path. And it doesn't have to be the case.
Totally agree.
Okay.
Totally agree. Sorry, my computer was updating my antivirus.
Well, hopefully it's not Norton or something like that, because otherwise I might lose you like mid conversation.
Oh yeah.
We've all been on those where like the antivirus kicks in. You're like, why is my computer performing like a Pentium 133? So
Oh
anyway,
man, I remember
but
those.
remember those days.
Mhm.
Okay, so then that transitions though. So we've now kind of framed out the fact that what the difference between management and leadership. We've also talked about the fact that management isn't for everybody. But now, based on your background, I actually am curious as you look at some of this stuff, as we look at that overlap, you came from the tech sphere, you now do stuff across industries. Is there something completely distinct and unique in the tech management space, or is that more of a myth?
You know, every tech company I ever worked with or for would tell me very early in the conversation, we're different, we're different, we're different. And actually, the only one that actually was different was Apple.
Okay.
So Apple is the corporate equivalent of a bumblebee. So aerodynamically, if you look at a bumblebee, it should not be able to fly. Its its
Yep.
its body is way too big, its wings are way too small, it's not shaped right, and yet the bumblebee does just fine. If you look at Apple's financials, you'll see that they're doing just fine. Thank you very much. So so Apple is in fact a different animal. And I remember once I was pitching a course to Apple, to the hardware group, and I brought up a slide and was making the point that as you move up the food chain, as you go from individual contributor to manager to senior manager to director and VP and so on, you need to move away from the tactical stuff and move more into the strategic stuff. Okay. And so when
Okay.
we're looking specifically at the management piece as a first line manager, I was saying that as a first line manager, you should be focused roughly 40-50% on technical stuff and about 40-50% on management stuff, and then the rest would be strategic.
Yeah.
And they spat the dummy. They absolutely lost their mind, and they hammered me on this. And what it came down to was, no, here at Apple, what we expect of our managers is 100% technical stuff and 100% management stuff. And I'm like, that's at least an 80-hour week.
Were you like, let's go back to the math here. That math does not work.
No, I just, the math worked. It just meant that they expected their managers to work 80 hours a week. And they looked at me straight face and said, yep, that's pretty
Okay.
much what it is. And I'm like, okay, this is probably not going to be a
sustainable.
good fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Apple has, Apple for me was a hard place to work because the imposter syndrome was huge. I could not get over the imposter syndrome because I'm surrounded by all these scary, smart people who are producing incredible amounts of work and product, and I was just scrambling to keep up, and it was exhausting. It was crazy.
Okay.
So I would say that in my experience, Apple truly is a different animal because they just expect 100% of everything. But otherwise, like I've got clients in architecture, high tech, solar.
But when I think about the skills, I even just think about that example at Apple, while expectations of output are different from what you described, the fundamental skills of execution, there's probably, if you're truly expecting 200% output from people, there's a set of skills that requires even being able to maintain and manage that. But underneath it, even being effective as a manager, there still would be a number of shared skills that would be transferable regardless of whether you work at Apple or anywhere else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so this is where we talk about being an empathetic human, which I've seen in different amounts in different companies. Making sure that you make that psychological transition into your new role as a manager. So you need to let go of the individual contributor doer role and move into a role where you are getting results through other people, unless you're at Apple, and then you do both. There's being able to set goals, smart goals or OKRs, your choice. Delegating is huge. That happens every place, regardless of where you are. Making sure that you can establish trust with your team is super important. So making sure that your team trusts you and you trust your team and they trust each other. Being able to be a great coach. I think everybody deserves great coaching. So being a great coach and being able to give firm but fair feedback. So, how can I be completely honest and completely candid with you while also being completely respectful and empathetic? While I'm letting you know that what you've done is either excellent or has fallen short of the mark. How do I do that in a way that doesn't destroy you? And then giving rewards and recognition. A lot of folks don't have a budget for reward and recognition. So how do you do that in a way that doesn't cost a lot? And then finally, managing change. So all of these things transcend industry, transcend
They do.
business or geography. It's like these are things you need to know whether you're at Apple or whether you're at a small architecture firm or whether you're in a solar startup. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, and that's where before we dig into the actual skills and topics, I wanted to address this piece and just get your lens on it because my experience has been very similar. And I've been in a lot of different industries and you hear the same thing. Oh, well, it's different here. And there may be nuances on the technical side of things. There may be nuances on some of the values or things that, a company may focus on type of thing. Sure. But when it comes down to it, I think the things you outlined right there, those are universal, whether you're working in aerospace, whether you're working in tech, whether you're working in law, corporate consulting. I mean, at the end of the day, you focus on those skills, you develop those skills well, you will be successful. Now, I'm curious because you spend a lot of your time really focused on kind of that initial transition from somebody who's been an individual contributor, they're making that first step into management. What we just talked about sounds easy on paper. You can go, well, there's just these core set of skills. You just do these things and you'll be successful. What do you see as being some of the biggest hurdles or trip ups for people making that jump? Because I think back to my early days of first becoming a manager, and you know, I know a lot of people don't even get the kind of guidance and training they need to make that jump, which is probably a gap in and of itself. But then on top of it, saying do these things and actually doing them and transitioning is not always an easy jump.
Yeah. A lot of people don't get that guidance. They don't get that training. So that's why I do what I do. That's
Okay.
why I exist. That's why Girard Training Solutions exists.
I mean, a lot of people just get whipped into it. It's just
Yeah,
like, hey,
absolutely.
you're really good at your job. Like you should manage the team of people doing it. And
Yeah, you're the best
that's your
engineer.
onboarding.
Yeah, you're the best engineer. So we're going to
Yeah.
promote you, and now you lead the other 4 engineers on your team. And then this person, well intentioned, they're not malicious
No.
usually, but well intentioned,
Usually.
and they make a complete mess. And they micromanage and they don't delegate and they become a bottleneck and they give harsh, critical, granular feedback. We do all the things that we don't want to have done to us, but we don't know any better. And so
Yeah.
that's why I exist. So to me, the big thing that you've got to do when you make that psychological transition is understand that first off, you're shifting from getting rewarded for, completing tasks to being rewarded for getting things done through other people. That to me is like the number one thing is you can't do it all. My favorite article these days is from the Harvard Business Review, HBR, and this is something you can download for free from HBR. And the article is called "Who's Got the Monkey?" It was written first in the 70s, then it was republished in the 90s. I'm still using it in 2024, so this thing has some serious legs.
Okay.
And what we're talking about is basically not taking on other people's problems. So imagine that your employees are walking around and they have these metaphorical monkeys sitting on their shoulders, chattering away, and they need to be fed and taken care of, and they're making a lot of noise and making messes. And your employee comes to you and says, "Hey, I need a hand with the TPS report. Can you help me with that?" And you say, "Sure, leave it with me. I'll take care of it for you." Then that employee metaphorically hands you their monkey. And if you do that all day, you wind up with 8 or 10 squawking, screeching monkeys that all need care and feeding. You're laden down with all of these creatures that are making a mess of things, and all your employees go home in 5 and they're happy. So my mantra for that is accept no monkeys. Don't accept other people's problems. Coach them to fix the problem themselves. And so that whole piece of making the transition is also about helping other people be self-sufficient so that you can look at them and say, what would you do if I wasn't here?
Yeah.
What if I wasn't around for you to ask, what would you do? And you kind of test your employee that way, and chances are they'll come up with a good answer.
They will.
Yeah.
Well,
And so
I think far too often, and I even see this in parenting, with kids. Kids are often far more smart and intelligent and creative and solid problem solvers than as parents we give them credit for. And it's interesting you bring that point up that it can be easy to take on that monkey, not only because people may come to you and go, "Hey, can you do this?"
Mhm.
and you can take that on. But there also can be this tendency. I remember when I first stepped into a management role, I was pretty good at what I did before. And so it can be easy to go see somebody doing something and go, well, that's not how I would do it.
Mm.
I would do it more like this. And to go, you know what? Let me take that monkey from you. Like, I know you're working on that thing, but it's
Yeah,
not
no, no, no.
exactly how I
You're
would
doing it
do it.
wrong. You're doing it wrong. Give it to me.
You know what? You just move over. You just move over. You know what? Just let me take care of that,
Get out of
and
the
I'll
way.
I'll just finish it. You just and you might. I've even seen, and even over the years, experienced this firsthand. You might think you're actually helping them not only with their work, but like, oh, well, I just, you're struggling with this and it's hard and I don't want you to be stressed out. Like, again, I think most people I've seen who are doing this, it's not malicious, draconian type stuff. It's, I'm either trying to help or I'm seeing it not being done quite the way I think it should. And I just want to help fix it type of thing. And you can end up pulling this stuff in. But man, you want to crush the spirit of the people working for you. Just jump in on their stuff and go, yeah, get out of the way. Just let me take care of that for you. And you will completely destroy the culture of a team.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think about the team I've got now. So I have a team of 3 folks who are all contractors and they're all extremely seasoned. So this is kind of easy. But all I do is come up to Sandra or Diana or Bill and say, I need X by X date. And they ask questions and make sure that they understand what I want. And I'm like, okay, go. I don't look over their shoulder. I actually have no idea, zero idea how they produce what I've asked them to do. But the end result is usually as good as I expected or better because they have autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So this comes from Dan Pink's book, Drive. And he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so if I say, you know what, you are responsible for the end result, I need it to look like this by this day. They say, okay, I got it. And then they go off and get creative.
Yeah.
Then they're working autonomously, which people crave. They have mastery of their craft, and I'm encouraging mastery of their craft. And then they're working towards some purpose bigger than just create the widget. You
Yeah.
know, we talk about why they work for me and why Girard Training Solutions exists. It's to make better managers, you know, to
Yeah.
make basically to make a better world where people can work and do good work and contribute to society. So by combining all of these things and thinking about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I'm like, I don't care if you use, you know, flint and steel to get this done. You
Yeah.
use your ingenuity and come back. And then if I need to give you feedback on the result, then we'll have that conversation later.
So this point right here, I think in my experience has been one of the biggest shifts that people who end up managing people struggle to make is
Mm,
this shift from focusing on outcomes
mhm.
and off of activity. And instead of getting wrapped up in how something gets accomplished or the way somebody goes about doing it, and we see this waging right now in the workforce when it comes to like remote work or flexible working type stuff, where people go, and managers a lot of times get hung up on, well, but that's not how I would do it, or I'm not comfortable with the way you're doing it. And I'm really curious because that can be a psychological shift for people to have to make to go, you got to change your whole way of thinking to go, I know what I need at the end, and I'm here to support you, but I'm not going to dictate the when, the where, and the how you get to that goal. And I, like you said, doesn't mean you just go do whatever you want. It's like, no, I'm going to give you coaching and feedback on the result. And if needed, I'll give you some tips and feedback along the way, but I'm going to largely give you a lot more autonomy. And I'm curious how you have helped managers through that. Cause I think that is fundamentally one of the hardest jumps to make from
Yeah.
an individual contributor to a manager, is to just kind of let go of that and go, I need to focus on outcomes. Cause I talk to a lot of managers where sometimes you go, what do you actually need your people to do? And they may not even necessarily be clear on that.
Mhm.
They know the activity, but they don't even know, like, well, I guess I haven't really thought about what I need on the other side.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so one of the things that I do in my class, one of my classes, is I'll have managers sit down and say, okay, make a list. Make a list of everything you must do that only you can do, and be really clear about that. And that should be a short list. Then make a list of things that you can share with other employees. And then finally make a list of things that you can delegate, that you can hand off.
Okay.
And just by doing that brief exercise and thinking, okay, that list of things that I must do is pretty darn short.
Or
Because
it
if I,
should be. To
yeah,
your point, it should be.
yeah,
If
and
it's long,
it usually is. It usually is fairly short because I'm challenging them before I set them loose. I'm challenging them. It's like, really look at what you can hand off.
okay.
And then we talk about accepting no monkeys. Like, don't let people hand you their squawking monkeys. Um, so what are the things that only you can do, and you focus on that while you then enable your team to go run with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to just even some of the basic leadership principles, I mean, that requires a degree of humility to keep that list short, and go, you know what, at the end of the day, the things that only I can do is actually not that long. That requires a degree of humility where you go, I, yes, I matter. And yes, I'm important, but it's not that my unique attributes are the only way that could ever get accomplished. And I think that in and of itself is a significant part of leadership, is recognizing rightly the role you play. Yes, you're important, but you're not such a unique snowflake that if you didn't do these 37 things, the world would fall apart.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So with that, at the same time, it's easy to talk about this stuff in simple times, when things are going smooth or when things like that. Something else I observe is when you get hit with the fire, something comes down and there's the urgency behind it. I think sometimes, especially for new managers, that can be tough because you may not necessarily have the experience or the confidence to kind of push up, things like that. How have you helped, or what do you see as some things that work well for these new managers or for managers who maybe struggle with this, where they're like, yeah, I'd like to delegate more, but the bottom line is like, I'm just getting dumped on and I just got to get it done. Because I think that's when I see really bad manager behaviors come out, is maybe when things are smooth, they're doing all right. When the pressure heats up, it brings out the worst in people.
I'm thinking of a couple of things here. I'm thinking SWOT analysis, I'm thinking goal setting, and I'm thinking change management actually could all play in here. Starting with a SWOT analysis. So let's say you take on a new team, you've got 6 people reporting to you. Do a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. You make a 2x2 matrix with strengths and weaknesses up top and opportunities and threats down below. And you really dig deep, and you can do this with your team. You really dig deep into what are the team's strengths, and don't accept trite one-word answers. Like, really write full sentences. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses internal to the team? And then externally, what are the opportunities external to the team that we might be able to take advantage of? And then finally, what are the threats, again, external to the team that either threaten the existence of the team or threaten team harmony? So being prepared with that, and being prepared with good goals, good, specific, smart goals, goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and trackable. Having those established before it hits the fan gives you something to fall back on. So I think that helps an awful lot. Then I think that every manager and every team needs to be change hardy. So you need to be hardened against change and ready to bend and flex when change comes down the pike, because we all know everything changes all the time. And so if you have
Change is consistent.
yeah. So if you as a manager are educated in a couple of change models and can be bendy flexy when it comes to change, and then if your team sort of understands the basics of navigating change themselves, then when stuff comes down the pike and it's on fire, you've got the resiliency to say, no problem, I got this. I can do it. It's a little stressful, but I can do it. And you're falling back on, we know what our SWOT analysis is. We know we have our SMART goals. So we're not running around like chickens with our heads cut off. We know who we are and what we're about and what we need to do. And we have that flexibility to handle change as it comes.
Yeah. Well, and it's some of the things you hit on there that I think over the years I've seen and just personally have found to be super helpful is just being able to kind of know what are those priorities. Because again, it can be very easy to get so caught up with the activity that's going on. You lose track of like, right, but what are the main kind of North Stars that we continue to be marching towards? And as a result, when things get blown up, which they always do, something always comes with that. You're not even necessarily quite sure, wait, how do we redirect or what are the implications of this? Which kind of goes back to some of the risk analysis that I think comes over time of being a manager is learning how to go, if we make this pivot, this is the impact it has on these other things. And then being able to frame that back up to the leaders above you to be able to say, is this really what we want? Do you understand the implications? And I know I see firsthand, especially sitting at the senior leadership seat, a lot of times senior leaders don't understand the implications of the ideas or the things that they want to do. They go, we just need to do this.
Mhm.
And they don't understand all the intricacies of what it takes to bring that to life. And I know I personally, a lot of times look to my frontline managers to go, here's what I'm thinking, but I need you to help me understand, what does that imply? What does
Mhm.
that require for us to get there? And as a manager, you have to be able to articulate that. And I think sometimes it can just be easy to go, well, we'll just get it done. Instead of
Mhm.
going, well, like, let's actually talk through this and represent it back up.
Mhm. Yeah, I think being able to manage up is a really important skill. And to me, that brings in influence skills. Doing a little reading about influence would be a good idea for a new manager. Maybe taking an influence course would be a good idea. Being able to hear a senior manager's request and not come back with a knee-jerk yes, no, but be able to come back with facts and data or whatever they need to hear so that they can take a step back and reconsider. And so to that point, I would say um, having new managers take a DISC assessment. And DISC is an acronym that stands for Dominance, Influence, Steadiness, and Conscientiousness. It's a fantastic personality and work styles assessment. It's something that I administer as part of many of my classes. And the idea is to get aware of your own personality and preferences first, then getting really good at spotting other people's personality and preferences, and then adjusting your style to match the other person so you give them what they need. So in the case of managing up to a manager, let's say you've got a really highly driven manager who comes up and says, I need this, boom, boom, boom. Okay, you're dealing with somebody who's a D, a high dominant. Okay, then they're going to need from you to understand. They're going to need you to get to the point, using facts, using logic and rationale, and using an interpersonal style that lets them know that you mean business.
Yeah.
So these are all things that you can learn to do so that you can manage up without being offensive or whining or anything like that.
Well, and what's interesting about that point, and this goes back to, I'll try and continue to thread some of these things together, is the humility that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires, because it can be easy. And I think we all tend to be this way. Wouldn't the world be great if everybody just accommodated us? Like,
Everybody just,
life would just be so much easier if everybody else just accommodated me. And especially in a first-time manager role, that can be a tough ship to jump to go, listen, you need to meet the people you're working for where they are. And granted, I think I would say to the senior leaders out there, we can do a better job of being a little more empathetic and understanding, and just recognizing that sometimes having a C in your title automatically creates a level of authority that you may not even realize. So when you're bouncing an idea, you may not realize the implications of that.
mm-hmm.
But I think this idea of, hey, I need to not go, well, this is what I want to do,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to, interact with you this way. Let's say I took a few on the chin. I've taken many on the chin in my early days, and even still to this day sometimes, where you lose sight of that and you go, well, no, this is how I'm going to meet them. And you get kicked in the teeth pretty hard if you're not careful.
Yeah. One thing that I tend to do with my team a lot, and by extension, my family with my twin 15-year-old daughters, is I ask Am I getting you what you need? Am I
Yeah.
giving you information the way you need it? Because all three of my team members are very different. Both of my kids are very different. And so becoming more flexible, and this is something that's ongoing for me because I'm not naturally a very flexible person. I kind of want things the way I want things. But if I can remember to bend and flex and approach folks the way they want to be approached, I'm
Yeah.
going to be more influential.
Well, and I think what can be challenging about that I have had to just learn over the years is that doesn't mean you're compromising who you are. And I think sometimes there's this perception that, well, if I'm accommodating, I'm compromising. And it's like, well, it's not you're giving up. And again, I've seen this with frontline managers where they go, oh, screw it. I'm just going to do what I'm told because it's just not working. Instead of going, well, no, if you adapt and you adjust, you can still accomplish what you need to accomplish. You just need to do it in different ways. And I think that's some of the flexibility you're getting at, where it's like, you don't need to just give up the things that are important to you or just roll over and be a doormat. It's more about figuring out, hey, how do I adjust the things that I need to adjust to be able to meet people where they are while still pushing them forward to where they need to be? And I feel like some of these skills just come through the school of hard knocks many times.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. Like you don't want to roll over because
No,
you do want to be yourself. But I wouldn't say that they'll have to come through the school of hard knocks. I mean, there's
that's
classes
fair.
you can take, there's books you can read, there's podcasts you can listen to, there's YouTube. So you can educate yourself so that you don't keep crashing into
Yes.
other personalities and making the same mistakes over and over. But
Well, and I think to your point, there's a level of knowledge and awareness you can build that
mhm,
you then have to put into practice and go, okay, I'm going to try this. Because I remember in my early manager days, there were some leadership classes I took, and you'd go, okay, conceptually, I get it.
mhm.
And then you go try it, and you'd get blown up, and you go, okay, I need to think differently about this, or I need to maybe adjust and pivot. And then you go back and you maybe learn something new, and then you try it and you get kicked, and then you try it again. And I mean, it's honestly that learning cycle that has to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why in all my classes I build in a lab environment where you try giving feedback, you try giving coaching, you try writing SMART goals. You do it all in the lab first so that you're not inflicting it on your team members for the first time.
Yeah.
So I just remember this is one of my friends at Apple, Tim. This is the one of the people who had leadership qualities without being a leader.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite people at Apple was Tim, and he had just taken a coaching class and was trying to give me some peer coaching, and I blew him up. I'm like, dude, you're thank you for the clumsy coaching, but I'm
Appreciate the
okay.
effort.
Yeah, nice effort, but I'm okay here actually.
Yeah.
So so he hadn't gotten the opportunity to try it in a lab,
Yeah.
and was trying it out on me. Now, luckily, we were friends, so it wasn't offensive or anything. My daughter's sticking her tongue out at me. Um, it's I it was we
You
had
had the benefit of the relationship
we had a strong enough
that was already
relationship
there where
that was
you could do
okay.
that and you could say, buddy, that was bad.
That was
Thank
that
you,
was
but
that was
that was rough.
pretty clumsy. Yeah, so that's actually still a joke that we
Yeah.
use back and forth. That was 15 years ago, and it's still like, yeah, it's still funny.
Well, but I think what you're hitting on there, and I think this is something that, if you're two things that, as we've talked through this, two threads that I think I can pull from this that, is really helpful is, one, the practice piece is essential. Being able to actually apply it and put it into practice. But I think sometimes what you get at there is, and this is where I think being a parent or just even having a network of people is you don't necessarily always have to experiment in the real life situation. And sometimes that's the worst place to do it is be like, oh, I'm going to run this play on my team for the first time. And you're like, wow, that didn't go so well. Or I'm going to push back on my boss and I'm just going to do it for the first time in our one-on-one and just go in hot. Like that's not necessarily the best approach. Yes, you need to learn through practice, but finding those safe spaces where you can do that, you can run a play and see, hey, how did this go? And I just even think about some of the things, I'll do with my kids, or I'll run by my wife to be like, this is going on. Here's how I'm thinking of approaching it. And this is the kinds of things I'm thinking about saying. And I'll get the, maybe soften it this way, or maybe you're coming in a little too intense over here, because there's a lot of communication breakdowns that can happen where you think you're saying this, but what somebody hears is not that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I one of the things I always recommend in all my classes is I encourage folks to work with an accountability partner. So work with somebody who you've gotten to know through the class, one or two other people, and make a coffee date within a week of the class. So don't let it go away, because what we're trying to do is avoid the forgetting curve, which is a real thing. And so avoid the forgetting curve by getting together, talk over a cup of coffee about what you learned, and practice some of the things we talked about. So just the two of you in a room, or in a Zoom room, where you practice giving feedback, but before you give it to a team member who might be a little difficult.
Yeah.
So that is very, very valuable.
Well, and what's funny on the tech front, this is something that I've actually found generative AI to be extremely helpful for, is even framing up and bouncing ideas off and kind of framing up your thoughts or what you want to say, and use generative AI to get feedback. Because the one thing generative AI is actually pretty good at is softening things. It is very good at softening and really kind of mitigating stuff. And there's plenty of times where I'll type an email that, maybe I'm going to shoot off into generative AI and be like, give me feedback on this. Like, how would this be received? And actually hear that, because it's great to have those people. And I actually would absolutely agree. You need people, not just generative AI. But sometimes you may not have that person that you can reach out to in that moment. And I've actually found generative AI to be a super helpful tool to go, here's what I'm thinking. Give me honest, candid feedback on how that might be received given this situation. And man, sometimes it's like, this might come across this way. And so it is interesting how technology is helping some of this stuff.
Well, since you've opened the generative AI door, do you use ChatGPT 3.5, 4.0, or something different?
So I use a combination. So I use GPT 4.0, and then I also use Anthropic Cloud's 3.5 Sonnet.
Okay. Well, I am a slow adopter of AI.
Okay.
Because I'm still a little worried about the hallucination factor.
Yeah.
And so I'm hanging back and waiting, but I've heard that 4.0 is better than 3.5, the free 3.5.
I mean, again, it's one of these things where, and I bring this up, you have to do it with wisdom and discernment. Like, I would never encourage somebody to go simulate your entire coaching conversation with AI, and then based on that, you should be good. Because one, depending on how much information you give it, how you prompt it, how you use it, that's going to dramatically change the quality of what you get back. But if you use it wisely, and again, there's times where I've actually recorded myself saying what I was going to say, and engage with it and go, how would you receive that? And I'll tell it up front, this is the character I'm talking to, and this is the situation I'm addressing, and these are some of the attributes of things. So I'm setting up the scenario and then talking back to it and saying, here's what I'm about to say. Give me feedback on that. And actually, it's extremely effective in giving you some high-level points. Now, should you just take what it says and go, well, GPT said I should do this, and now I'm going to do it? That would be a terrible idea. So as much as I'm a tech fan, anybody listening to this who's like, oh, great, I'll use GPT or Anthropic or whatever to give me feedback, do it with caution. But I found it to be a really great starting point and thought collaboration partner to go, I hadn't considered that angle, or this might be a way I would restructure my feedback or my thinking to help communicate it in a different light. And instead of spending a ton of hours going back to managers and their time constraints, rather than rewriting the whole email 30 times based on your audience to meet them where they are, right? You can just have generative AI go, here's my thoughts. Now frame it for the CEO, or frame it for this person who has this kind of personality. So there's some pretty powerful ways.
Cool. Okay.
So
thanks.
I do want to dig into this one, because a lot of the things you hit on talked about being able to delegate to people, being able to know what goals are, being able to focus on outcomes, not activities. And a lot of getting that right. And you talked in the beginning about the importance of empathy and being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And we even just talked about the fact how important that is to be in the way you communicate with people, because you need to meet them where they are. All of those things require relationships. And so I'm really curious to spend some time as we kind of close this up on the importance of relationship building and actually getting to know people as it relates to being an effective manager.
Yeah. Well, the first and longest chapter in my book is about empathy and the importance of empathy. And I feel very strongly about this because I personally experienced both sides of this. So I experienced my first manager in Silicon Valley was a phenomenally empathetic human being. And when my mother died, he bent over backwards to make space for me, to take care of things, to grieve, to go to the funeral. Like he's like, we got you, don't worry. So that was one extreme. And then on the other extreme, when my dad died, I was working at a completely different company, completely different manager, and I was grieving and not doing very well, and I got performance managed. So
Wow.
I've had kind of both sides of that.
Yeah, you've experienced
And
both extremes.
yeah, exactly. And so I'm like, you know what? I think that in 2024, in the 2020s, we need to really ramp up our humaneness and learn how to become more empathetic. And for a lot of folks, they're probably going, yeah, that's nice. I'm not a naturally empathetic person. My answer to that is that's okay. You don't have to be. There are lots of books on empathy. There's Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. There's another book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 that is a much easier read than Goleman's book. There are lots of things that you can do to take small steps to build relationships with folks. Just for example, by asking, how are you at the beginning of a meeting? So at the beginning of a one-on-one, how are you? And then you respond, and then ask again, how are you really?
Yeah.
And really listen completely. So, you're not just listening to respond, you're not just listening to jump in, but you're listening for what the person says and how they say it and the context and the nonverbals and all the things, so that you have a much better idea of how that person's actually doing. And then you spend a few minutes just, how's it going? How are things? Not to become a therapist. I'm not suggesting that
No.
managers have to be counselors. That's what the employee assistance program is for. That's what HR is for. And there are professional counselors out there, but at least to demonstrate, like, I actually, can I
To be
swear
a
on the show?
friend.
Can I swear on the show?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, just like I actually give a shit
Yeah.
about you as a person, and I really care. And I've done this to great effect. Most recently with one of my team members whose cousin recently passed, somebody they were very close to. It doesn't take a lot of time.
No.
It doesn't
Being a
cost,
decent human being.
it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't
Yeah.
cost anything except to put yourself out there a little bit and say, you know what, I'm listening. Brene Brown, who's one of my heroes, has a fantastic video on YouTube on, if you look up Brene Brown, Sympathy versus Empathy, it's an animated short.
Yep. I
And
know exactly which one you're talking about.
yeah, in about 10 minutes, she kind of spells out the difference between sympathy and empathy, where, sympathy is like, wow, sucks to be you. Empathy is, how can I help?
Yep.
And sometimes it's as simple as that. So that's where I would start with the whole relationship building thing, is just like, be a caring human being, while also having your boundaries. You have to do both things. You can't take on, it's almost like taking on monkeys. You don't want to take on other people's
Yeah.
problems, but you know what? I care about you. You matter.
Well, and I think that going into this, I think this is where it can be a struggle, especially for first-time managers, especially if you're being promoted within your team and you're going like, how do I walk this? We were peers, now I'm their boss. How do I build relationships? What kind of boundaries do I set? But I think, to your point, and my observation over the years has been, we often overcomplicate and over-engineer some of this stuff. And sometimes what it really takes to be a good, empathetic, caring leader is, like you said, just caring about your people and having a genuine interest in who they are as individuals. And, there can be this tendency to be like, well, work is work. And we just talk about work. I mean, I know every single person that has worked under me. I know who they are. I get to know their kids' names. I get to know their family. I get to know these things because I actually genuinely have an interest in who they are. And that helps me better understand what makes them tick. It helps me understand the things that, like you said, you're experiencing a death in the family. That affects people. If you aren't close enough to them to even know that that's going on, it's really hard to be empathetic. And building that intentional time in, I think sometimes conventional wisdom says, well, that's not work. But my observation has been that is very much work. And the time you invest in those kinds of things pays massive dividends in the long run.
Yep. Yeah. I can't stress enough how fundamental human kindness, even when it's hard, even when the other person is acting badly, that matters a lot and will help folks get through the change curve faster so that they come out the other side ready to perform again. I just think it's so fundamental, so important.
Well, and what's interesting about it is, over the years, and there's always exceptions to the rules. So I guarantee there will be people that watch and listen who maybe been a manager or a new manager or whatever and go, well, I have this one person. There's this one, they're just this impossible whatever. And you're like, you're going to run into those exceptions. Like I definitely have had people over the years where I'm like, this is just too hard of a nut to crack type of a thing. I think, maybe to your earlier point, maybe you need some professional therapy outside of work type of a thing. Those situations exist. But I would say the vast majority of the time, people want to perform well. They want to contribute to the work they do, and they really are trying to do their best. And I think operating off those positive assumptions about people, man, over the years, the number of times when somebody has been off and I've sat down and gone, hey, like, I'm interested in what's going on. Like, help me understand. This isn't the you I'm used to seeing and the you that usually shows up at work. Is everything okay? Like, are you doing all right? I remember one person, it was years ago. She just broke down sobbing. And at first you're like, oh my, like, what do I do with this? But then it came out that she was preparing for her wedding and she was stressed out and she was overwhelmed and she was trying to pull all these things together. And she just needed somebody who could go, okay, all right, so let's talk about what we can do. Like, I'm not going to take on your wedding planning. I can't just give you a pass on all your work, but let's talk about how we can work together on that. And my goodness, the performance increase I saw in her, it was like night and day. It just, again, some of these examples I've had over the years where you think, oh, I'm too busy with work, or this is going to be a negative impact on performance. I'm like, no, it's not. When you actually invest in people, man, do they surprise you left and right.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's a great story.
Okay. So I'm curious, for as we kind of wrap up in here, as you kind of think of any kind of concluding thoughts on, for people who maybe are just becoming managers or maybe early managers or maybe even seasoned managers who are smashing their heads against the wall going, I am really struggling. Are there any common things that you like out of the gate go, yeah, there's probably 1,000 things you could check, but there are a few check engine lights that usually are some first pass indicators that if you're struggling with being a manager, if you're frustrated, if you're having a hard time, that you would say, start here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would say, first off, have you set good goals with your team? Does everybody know who does what, how much, and by when? And are those goals shared so that everybody knows what everybody else is working on? So that's the first thing I would talk about. We've spent a lot of time talking about delegating. So making sure that you're not the bottleneck, that you are giving very clear instructions on delegating. And then I would talk about coaching and feedback, learning how to coach. Michael Bungay-Stanier writes a great book called The Coaching Habit. I would read that and use his 7 questions to coach. And then I would also use, for example, the simple SBI model, situation, behavior, impact, for feedback. And making sure to use the feedback model for good stuff as well as constructive stuff. So make sure that you catch people doing something right a lot and say so. And it does not have to be complicated. A quick email, a quick aside, Hey, Chris, thank you so much for doing X. That really helped. Just say it. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a big celebration. Don't save it up.
No, you know what's funny about that though is the intentionality. And again, this is where we can overcomplicate it. And it can be easy to be like, well, I don't have budget to celebrate every good thing people do. And you're like,
You don't need any budget.
nobody's saying that what you have to do. Or there's a lot of times where you in your head think it. And it's easy as a manager to go, but did I actually tell the person that? Like, did I actually say to them, I observed you doing this good thing. And I just want to let you know, nice job. Like I saw it. Awesome work. Keep it up. And if you balance enough of that and are really intentional about it enough, then when you have to have the like, hey, we got to talk about what happened here. Like, not, I found it's not met with the same kind of.
Yeah, especially if you've been putting deposits into the bank, if you've been praising progress, if you've been investing in this other person by showing just a little bit of interest in who they are and what they're about, asking how they are, really listening to that answer, then when it's time to give constructive feedback, it's not going to be destructive. It's not going to ruin the relationship. It's not going to ruin the person. It might still be hard to take, especially if it's a big thing that went wrong, but it's going to be less disruptive than if you only ever criticize.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think and again, it's simple stuff. It's simple stuff. You know, you don't have to, like you said, throw a party for every single thing everyone on your team does. Yeah. Right. Like, cause honestly, you do that too much and it gets to a point where people are like, well, this doesn't even mean anything versus the sincere,
exactly.
hey, I saw you doing something awesome. Keep it up. I noticed. And man, that's huge. That's huge to do that kind of stuff. So I think, the other thing that I would just close on is, all these things we talked about and what I've seen about being a really great manager, it's hard, but it's not complicated. And I think that's one of the things where there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things you got to do. There's a lot of stuff you got to be intentional and focused on, but they're often a lot easier than they sometimes are made out to be. And if you're just disciplined and diligent in that over time, you'll really build a healthy, dynamic team. Is that a fair summary?
That's what it's about. That's where we're headed.
I love it. I love it. Well, I hope that, for those of you listening who are maybe considering getting into management or are in management and maybe struggling with your teams, I hope this has given you some practical thoughts on, hey, what could I do to be a better manager? Because, man, I can tell you right now, with everything going on in the world, being a good manager, it's not even just about the performance of your team. Like, these are the dinner table conversations that you're actually affecting, and how good people feel about waking up in the morning and showing up to work, and the positive impact you can have on people's lives is incredible. It really, truly is. So I hope it encourages you to do a great job.
There are studies that show that managers have a greater impact on their employees' mental health and well-being than their spouses or their therapists or their doctors. Like, as a manager, you define reality for your team member. So use your powers for good and not evil.
And that's why I end up, honestly, it's so funny you say that, because that can be a terrifying thing. And that's where a lot of times when I talk to people, we're like, I want to be in management. I'm like, with the Peter Parker principle, with great power comes great responsibility. And is that really what you sign up for? Because what you just described, that's a heavy burden to carry. And I understand when people go, I don't want to carry that. I'm like, good, better to identify that and say, that's not for me, than to be like, well, it's fine because I need the raise. And then, to your point, you're traumatizing the people underneath you. Don't do that.
Inflicting misery. Don't inflict misery.
Don't inflict misery.
It's very much like scuba. So when I was younger, I had all these extreme hobbies. I was mountain climbing, rock climbing, scuba diving, sailing, mountain biking, all this stuff. And I used to insist that all my friends had to do all the same things I did, right? You have to, to scuba dive, you have to mountain bike. As I've gotten older, I realized, it's not for everybody. And so when I get somebody in class and they get into the pool and I ask them to take their mask off underwater and they go, nope. Like, you know what? That's that is okay. You do
Yeah.
not have to do this. This is supposed
Yeah.
to be fun. And if it's not, then we can make other arrangements, or maybe you pick up another hobby, but it's
Yeah.
okay. It's
Maybe
okay.
this isn't a hobby for you.
It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks to everybody who watches and listens to this. Again, I hope you found it encouraging, and we will see you on the other side.